Coming up this week on Success Won't Come Calling.
Sometimes when we're stuck, any change could feel like a mountain. So I think start small and showing yourself some care first of all. When we have a challenge, it can seem so much worse in our head. So sharing a problem would be the first place to start. It's not about the other person's reaction. It's just about opening up that box rather than just keep it in your head to yourself and have a load of judgments on top of that.
Hello friends, Simon Gibson here. Welcome to SWCC. If you like the podcast, please click subscribe and you will know the very moment one of our episodes lands. I'm very happy to welcome back Siân Quipp today on the podcast. Siân, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome indeed. Siân is a cognitive hypnotherapist, wellness coach, and you're also the founder of My Wellness Hub.
Yes.
I've got that all right, haven't I?
Yes, you've got that all right.
And we met last time, did we? We met, I think you were our fifth or sixth guest,
yeah,
so
right
very early doors. And it was just when we were starting to come out of the 2021 COVID lockdown. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. And it was a strange time to just be out and about and in a room with people without masks on. That's
right, it was that point. Everyone will remember when getting out and about was starting to feel like something you should do. But it was still very weird to sort of be sat in. So, because it's COVID in this room, or isn't it? But we survived anyway.
Yes, yeah. It's strange thinking back to that time that seems like yesterday, but also a really long time ago.
Yeah, feels like a lifetime ago. The reason I wanted to invite you back was because I remember us speculating last time about what the situation with mental well-being across the country and across the world would look like when we got the other side of COVID. And because we all hope we are there now, and based upon some of the things I'm seeing as an employer in business, I wanted to get you back and just see what your experiences are now at the sharp end of helping clients who are struggling with mental well-being. Because I mean, I've managed to dig out some of the statistics. Jacob, have you got them, mate?
Yes.
It's some of these they look rather worrying. Anyone who's on YouTube will be able to see these now. So like I say, do click over if you can. 1 in 6 adults have experienced a mental disorder in the past week. 2 million adults and nearly 1 million children accessed NHS mental health. Oh, goodness me, look at this about waiting times. Somewhere between 4 and 86 days for treatment. Some of these statistics are really quite worrying, aren't they? I don't know if it's on the next page, Jacob. There's some info about how these are increasing, and I mean this to me is perhaps the most worrying. Around 1 in 6 children aged 6 to 16 had at least one probable mental health problem in 2021, up from 1 in 9 in 2017. So I mean that amongst kids, I mean, first of all, that is a dramatic increase from 1 in 9 to 1 in 6. And secondly, this was exactly the sort of thing that you and I were talking about on the past podcast, that all of these lockdowns and schools shut and a challenge in terms of personal development for kids and of course for parents trying to help them with that. This is just the sort of outcome that I was worried about. So you're helping every day people who are suffering from poor mental well-being, and that's both to the individual and also helping employers who are prioritizing their employees' mental well-being. Do these statistics resonate with you in terms of the problems worsening?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot more people are trying to access help or are more aware of the symptoms that, being demonstrated as something that really needs urgent help. And I think more people are talking about mental health in general. So on one hand, you've got the negative aspect of there are more people who are suffering. But on the other hand, there's more people talking about it. So it almost feels a bit more normalized. So if before COVID times, when I was speaking to employers, people didn't think that that was something that they needed to prioritize in the workplace. It's something that might be a nice thing to do. Whereas now people understand that it's essential for their workforce, that they should provide something, some support in some way, because the impact of mental health and well-being in general and work and productivity and targets and all the things that make a business go are so essential. They're essentially linked. So I think in some ways it's been highlighted in a great way. But there's, such a demand on services that people who are at the urgent end of care are just not being seen. They're kind of lost in the system.
Well, we've got some real evidence of that, haven't we? Because I know you've listened to the episode where I saw Nathan Dunn a couple of weeks ago, and of course Nathan's a living, breathing example of this happening. Anyone who hasn't heard the episode, Nathan, he's an ultra walker, but he's someone with a history of poor mental well-being, and he actually had a suicide attempt. And then the day after, thankfully, he didn't go through with it. And the day after, he tried to access NHS care and was told it was a 15-week wait. And it does seem strange to me that I could turn up at A&E tonight with a sprained ankle, and I probably could be seen there and then for some form of treatment. Yet someone who's attempted suicide is just deprioritized and put into what sounds like a very long queue. So, I mean, is that your experience of this ability to access care in the public sector?
Yeah, so more and more people who can, have the means to, are looking for private support because they are on waiting lists that, they don't even know when they'll be seen. So people who can are accessing private support. So, my services I'm inundated with requests. So, I know in my professional network in the Quest Institute that they're, really in demand too.
And have you seen any change in the type of symptoms that are presenting to you over the past couple of years compared to what you saw before?
I think maybe it's not necessarily the type. I think when people come and contact me, they want to solve a problem. Maybe they've got an addiction or some control behaviors that are really unhelpful. And maybe they wouldn't even call it a mental health issue. But then underneath that, they are distractions or protective strategies that we've developed over time to help ourselves with very uncomfortable feelings. And it's part of our nervous system's responses to extreme stress. So, in lockdown, some people looked at all, you could see in conversations or on posts that people were running or, doing yoga, or people were eating more or drinking more or hiding away or spending more time online. And it just, a stimulus creates a response within us, and we would look at our backlog of coping strategies to manage that. And for some people who have access to really good coping strategies wouldn't be as affected. Maybe people who've got a really good support network. And then other people who have maybe had trauma or some severe challenges growing up would see that uncertainty and that stress of the pandemic as more threatening to them. So on an unconscious level, without people realizing, so then they would go to their coping strategies that wouldn't be helpful for them and can often cause more problems.
And that would be things like drinking too much or drugs or that sort of very counterproductive solution, very short-term solution to what could be a medium-term problem that can be resolved, but not without the right support and resource.
Yeah. So, all of those problems start out as solutions, and it's whether, if you look at long-term solutions that will bring some health benefits eventually, was what you would look for consistently to do. Whereas some, those negative behaviors would be detrimental in the long run. But everyone's trying the best with what they have in those situations. And we always have this, judgment and negativity on our personal responsibility of we're failing if we're reaching for those responses, when actually it's a deep embedded response unconsciously that we're trying to give ourselves that comfort or that distraction or that moment of relief in those moments.
It's interesting the point you made about overeating and overdrinking, because this did become, I wouldn't say a joke. It became something that people were viewing with a bit of levity during lockdown, that, there's nothing to do but have a drink. There's nothing to do but that type of thing. When someone approaches you with, for example, an escalation in their use of alcohol, what are the sorts of issues that you try and investigate?
Yeah, so it just completely depends on the person, really. Yeah, some people might see it as an addiction, some people might not. They just see it as like a habit that's just got a bit too dominant in their day or their week. But like you said, some things are normalized, like being addicted to your phone, sugar, alcohol, food, even the lockdown stone, and there is a lightness to it. Yeah. And there's some things that are equally as harmful are really looked down upon as a coping strategy. But none of them are right or wrong. It's just, the intention behind it, I suppose.
When you identify what the driver is in that sort of negative behavior loops, what are the sort of strategies you implement to try to help?
Yeah, so like I said, so it's not the alcohol per se that's the problem, it's the intention behind it. So it's personal for the individual, whether it's distraction, it's avoiding, numbing is one of the most common things. So you would look at what you're numbing yourself from, and what on that unconscious level, behind the scenes is going on for you to move towards something that would stop you feeling, would stop you thinking, and would stop you being in the moment.
But I mean, that's interesting about the numbing and the distraction, because it sounds a very obvious solution to say that depriving yourself of the negative behavior that's causing you a problem is the solution. But
and that's where most people go. Yeah. So people, if they've loaded up on sugar, would go, on a keto diet, and that's it. And it's willpower and motivation that are the problems, whether you've got inner strength and motivation and willpower, rather than, well, why is this out of balance in the first place? What needs am I not meeting, or what am I avoiding that makes me go down this well-worn path?
That's
what people don't always appreciate.
In terms of that, just using, because I mean, the reason I ask you this, because I was drinking too much during the lockdown, and it wasn't that I was drinking to the extent that I was drunk or that I was hungover the next day or that it interfered with my work or my home, but I was drinking too much based upon both what I'd done previously and what the recommended units are. And I mean, pretty much as soon as we got back to normal, I kind of got back to normal. But I just wondered what are some of the drivers you've seen when someone does just let a habit, which is okay, go a bit out of control? What are some of the examples you've seen? Yeah,
so it might be, in your case, that some of your other outlets were taken away, like the gym or seeing friends. So you're like, well, how do I wind down? It's a really common problem for parents. They have to stay at home with the kids, but you want to punctuate your day and your evening and have your time. Then you would look at something quick and easy that, is deemed by society that's okay, and that averts, really hone in on that pain point of, the the advert that you know, while you're watching something will be a glass of wine or something, and it's okay to drink certain things like a really nice glass of wine than, you know, a beer in a brown bag or something like that.
So it's normalized and even maybe glamorized at some point.
Yeah.
It's interesting what we were talking about in terms of the access to public support. Because, of course, in recent years, in the last couple of years, we've quite rightly heard a lot about the heroic commitment of the medical and nursing professions during this period. And I think what it's really important to stress here is that the doctors and nurses, they aren't the National Health Service. They're part of the National Health Service, but then they're not it. And what frustrates me is when you get government ministers effectively stood behind doctors and nurses saying, look how fantastic the NHS service is. No, it's the doctors and nurses who are fantastic. The service is nowhere near where we need it to be. Because just look at Nathan Dunn's experience. If you had any other service provider who in an emergency situation was battered off for 4 months, I mean, can you imagine that in a business situation where you battered off a new client for 4 months? And I think there needs to be a serious rethink about how the government and society views the NHS. It's supposed to be a service. And from everything we're hearing from a mental health perspective, we're in crisis.
Yeah. And even just the way the conditions are treated as illnesses rather than maybe a normal response to things, you know, a normal response to stress or adversity or challenge. And the language around it, you know, really needs to be re-examined. But yeah, a lot of people are being let down who haven't got access or means to other support. And maybe that was the first time, you know, that they've reached out to someone and then haven't, you know, and, you know, I see people all the time who've said, I was waiting for that phone call for weeks and it was that day and that time and nobody phoned. And it's not, you know, and people are just overloaded in these services because they're not organised correctly.
Well, they're either not being properly resourced, or they're not being properly managed, or they're not being properly funded, or a combination of the three.
Yeah.
And it's just unacceptable. It's unacceptable that the taxpayers' hard-earned money is being funneled into a service which is being so badly managed. And that is not the fault of doctors and nurses and non-medics who work in the NHS. But we should be putting more pressure on the government and trotting out statistics like they do about how they've increased investment in mental health. Well, I'm sorry. Listen to my podcast with Nathan Dunn. This was 6 months ago. It is not working. And I think that needs to be a message which is continually highlighted and prioritised.
Yeah, agree.
What's your views then on if somebody is in a bad spot in terms of their mental well-being, if they're anxious or if they're depressed? Obviously, what they should do in an ideal world is reach out for private support. But the reality is not everyone can do that. Not everyone has the finances in order to do that. In terms of what is within our control to positively impact how we're feeling, our sense of mental well-being, where do you think the priorities are there?
So how someone could help themselves? Yeah. So I think sometimes when we're stuck, any change could feel like a mountain, you know, like a huge distance between where they want to be and where they are. So I think start small, just something that you could do for yourself that's consistent, and showing yourself some care, first of all. And again, you know, that might sound like a bit soft or like a nice thing to do, but it can be transformative. There's lots of research into how self-compassion, kindness to others, or gratitude could really help. And I suppose it depends on where people are. You know, that might might seem achievable, or some people might not know even what self-compassion, what these words even mean, because they've not seen examples of that in practice around themselves. So when we have a challenge, it can seem so much worse in our heads if we dwell on it and we're the only input into it. So sharing a problem would be the first place to start, to have a conversation. You've seen yourself, with all the people that you've interviewed here, of how powerful that vulnerability can be and how that is real connection, isn't it? So loneliness is one of the main things that I've seen coming through the door more often than not. And again, you wouldn't necessarily say that would be a mental health issue per se, but it's something that underpins a lot of conditions or how we feel about ourselves. So the opposite of loneliness would be connection. So, and you can be surrounded by people and still feel lonely. So being authentic in ourselves would be the way to connect the most deeply. So that doesn't necessarily mean telling everyone everything about yourself, but choosing someone you trust to say, I'm not having a good time, I'm not coping very well, and just start that ball rolling. And it's not about the other person's reaction. It's just about opening up that box rather than just keep it in your head to yourself and have a load of judgments on top of that. And, whether it's someone trying to give you advice or saying the wrong thing or the right thing, none of that is the important aspect. It's more of, you just reaching out and having that sense of connection with someone.
What you said there on small steps, that has to be right, doesn't it? Because when any of us is faced with a problem that's causing us emotional distress, it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by the outcome that you want to achieve a long way down the track.
Yeah.
So if you feel miserable and your goal is happiness, that happiness can become overwhelming in terms of the sheer gear shift that is needed to go from the state of affairs you're in to the one you aspire to. Whereas in reality, reducing sadness gradually and gradually increasing happiness through some of the strategies that you've just talked us through, that's a lot more achievable than trying to instantly find a silver bullet solution in like a eureka moment, which is going to mean that instantly you're better.
Yeah. Yeah. And little bits of joy throughout your day, and just having that focus in the moment, like you said, overwhelm can be really demotivating, can't it? Because you don't know where to start and you can't see the wood for the trees. We have this idea that we have to read that book or do that podcast, listen to that podcast or do that thing that makes the difference. But actually, maybe it's even simpler than that. And it's just being still, for just a few minutes of a day, to just check in on how you're feeling and let things come up. The problems arise, and it's not through being more sad than happy. It's not allowing these things, having this sense of judgment over these are happy or good feelings and these are bad feelings. If we express those feelings, they pass. And if we know that we have this core well-being within us and know that on the deepest level we are okay, then we are safe to express those emotions. So say anger, anger's not a bad emotion, but repressing it pops out in other places, doesn't it? If you think of a pressure cooker, and the same with sadness or grief, if we have these ideas of that's over now and I shouldn't have this feeling or this experience, then we're just pushing it down, and then it comes out in other behaviors and in other ways that are more harmful in the long run.
That's a really interesting point about certain emotions, which we would think of as negative, having their place. I suppose you would say. I mean, if you think about it, something like frustration, even anxiety, anger. Well, these all have like a function to some extent. I mean, sometimes you should feel frustrated.
Yeah.
You should feel anxious. I mean, feeling anxious is one of our risk management mechanisms.
Yeah.
Feeling angry is a natural human emotion. I think where it becomes problematic is where the emotion becomes all-consuming and the subject of lots of rumination, where the anger rules all of your thoughts rather than being a passing emotion.
Yes. So, they say what you resist persists. So if you don't express that in a safe way, or, in a way that is right for you in that moment, then it does, come out in other ways. So say, for anger, we don't really have good examples necessarily of how you express anger, without judgment on that, especially, growing up at school, that you get punished for it. You don't really get it, channeled in a way that would be healthy. If you think about examples for you growing up, say, what did you learn about anger? It was not acceptable.
Exactly. And I mean, do you know what? I can't remember who I was talking to this about on the podcast. You didn't learn anything about managing how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And even I would think about sort of personal responsibility and rationality at school. It's something which I think, there's an assumption that we just acquire as part of our evolution, as part of our development. But I mean, the way I've learned, I remember on the podcast last time we were talking about the fact that I used to suffer with frustration, anger, self-recrimination, all from a business perspective. And I mean, the way I found myself able to get over those challenges was really to just approach them in terms of a rational time out, like you described, and almost talking to myself in a very calm and rational voice and saying, what is the purpose of this anger? In what way is it making yours or anyone's lives better? And if it isn't it better to just let it go and tackle problems on their rational merits rather than on the basis of this ruminated negative emotion? And I mean, I found that so powerful and so productive in terms of the way I operate the business and my life.
But it starts with that awareness, doesn't it? Of, it's not always the person's fault that you're angry with, or how it manifests, say, like in a work context. It's not that email that comes through that's completely unreasonable. It's, something that's been bubbling up all day maybe, and that your brain is like, well, that's why I feel angry, because something outside myself is out of order. And it's just that awareness that has to be the first step of, and that's, the problem when we're overwhelmed or we're constantly distracted and busy, that we don't check in to give ourselves that space for that awareness to start with.
Absolutely.
And that's why, just a few minutes of, it's either being or doing the modes that we're in, and just being in the moment, where you're not necessarily in your head, in the past or the future, you're just in the moment, which can be quite boring, which is why a lot of us don't do it anymore, or not as much as, was available to us, say, like 10, 20, 30 years ago. Just having that space and quiet to be with yourself, then you can check in much more regularly, more on a deeper level. So when that Dr. Chatterjee, who has, lots of different books on wellbeing, he uses the example of doing OBS in a hospital, checking people's like blood pressure and the heart rate and how they're doing their basic needs, can predict if someone goes into intensive care or not, or, future problems further down the line. And that's been, shown to have such an impact. But yet we don't really do that for our mental health. We don't really check in to see how we're doing, or what could be building up without us realizing.
And do you have a particular book that
all
you
of them are
recommend?
good. Yeah, all of them are good. His latest one is Happy Mind, Happy Life, I think. So yeah, all of them are really good.
Maybe we could get that on our links, guys. I think that would be really useful if anyone's listening who wants to access a book which might help them. I mean, because the point you just made there about, it's back to this accident and emergency analogy, isn't it? We seem to have therapeutic mechanisms to deal with relatively minor physical discomfort and pain, but neglecting much more significant psychological, mental problems.
Yeah. He suggests like the 3 M's. So it's mindfulness, movement, and mindset. And what you said about how can people help themselves, it would be really small changes. He says even just a few minutes a day. You don't have to clear half an hour to meditate. It's just being, if you're boiling a kettle or waiting around, just resist that urge to fill that space with productivity. Even if we're scrolling through social media, it gives us the illusion of productivity when it isn't. It's a time waster. So just being in that moment of, seeing what you see, hear what you hear, feel what you feel, any touch, taste or smell. And that is calming for our nervous system. And, if you did that regularly throughout your day, you'd notice a big difference.
I found journaling very helpful.
Yeah.
At the start of this year, I changed my day around. I started getting up a lot earlier. So I started getting up at 5:15, and 15 minutes is just for planning and journaling. Then I go to the gym, then I come back, and when the kids are getting up, I'm there to contribute and to help and to get them off to school and whatnot. And I find those early hours to be perfect for this little bit of reflection, because you really do feel at that time in the morning like you sort of are owning that period of time. Whereas, of course, trying to do this on the train on the way to work, I'm not saying it's not doable. I'm sure it is. But I sometimes feel like the king of the morning when I'm there at 5:15.
Yeah. And so, the Dr. Chatterjee example, he calls it micro stress doses. So if you're already, bombarded with alarms or meeting everyone else's needs, making sure the dog and the kids and everyone else is okay, and then you look at emails or respond to phone calls or problems. So the opposite of that is, like you said, reclaiming your morning. That's exactly what he would recommend, is just having that bonus time that's for yourself. So you're straight away treating yourself with respect. You're showing yourself that you're safe, to have that space, that you're not always in response to something, which, is not necessarily a bad thing, but it takes the power away for you to shape your day from the start. So what I'm hearing when you say that you've got that bonus time for yourself is that you're topping up your tolerance on your patience levels before the day even starts, and just getting your mind clear on what your priorities are.
And also, it's an opportunity to feel good about achievements, because working out early doors, if you've done 500, 600 calories by 7 a.m. and you're then walking out, you've got a full planned day ahead of you, and the majority of people are still in bed, that is a very empowering, satisfying feeling.
Yeah, that you've got ahead of the game.
Exactly. Yeah. In terms of other areas of life which we can control, how important do you place sleep in a good, well-balanced mental well-being?
Yeah, so this is something close to my heart because I've got 2 young children and constantly bombarded with how bad it is to have your sleep disrupted. So yeah, I know a lot of stats on sleep, but that would be another first step in helping your mental health and your physical health too. And that sometimes is one of the main things that is impacted when you have poor mental health. sleep. So it's a measurement really of well-being too. I always ask clients about their sleep as something that is a building block that we would work on together. So yeah, it affects everything. It affects your mood, it affects your resilience throughout the day, it affects your choices of what, food or drink you consume. So if you've, at a deficit, then you warm up it with caffeine, cool down with alcohol. You try and get started, don't you? And sometimes we do need more rest than we give ourselves time for.
On the issue of diet, is that something because I think most people will be able to resonate with what you just said, Sián, in that when you're tired or stressed, I mean, for me personally, stress is a trigger. I sometimes think to myself, something will happen, a little bit stressed, and all of a sudden I've got the fridge open. I'm just thinking, what are you doing? And it's really strange because consuming that bit of chocolate makes no difference at all to the trigger point for your stress. But there seems to be something there which compels, when you're in a certain mindset, to seek out these little bits of pleasure.
Yeah, so, for a lot of us, it'd be comfort. Fat and sugar taste great and give us a hit of something, don't they? So it's a strategy, a short-term strategy to give ourselves something that we might need in that moment. Maybe 5-minute walk outside, a stretch, a bit of movement, like your favorite song putting on, a chat to someone, a little mini nap, you're listening to a meditation, a cuddle with your dog or your cat. Those things might give you comfort, but it's that well-worn path again of, when we hit a stimulus, we go to that back catalogue of what our responses are and what, again, is deemed okay to like eat a whole bar of chocolate that you don't need. People talk about that and it's not a bad thing necessarily, when there are so many other options to give yourself what you might need in that moment. It's not always, it doesn't have to be that old habits all the time.
No, and you were talking earlier about sort of breaking that down and seeing what the trigger points are and
yeah, and like you said, the solution is not eating chocolate. It's just giving yourself what you actually need in that moment. That's the solution, rather than avoiding chocolate, for example.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So we're here now. It's end of April. Mental Health Awareness Week will be on us by the time this episode comes out. So is there anything in particular you're doing in My Wellness Hub? Obviously, my group, Sparring Group, works with you, and we have done for some time now. What are you doing with us and your business clients?
Yes, so Mental Health Awareness Week is a really good chance to access lots of resources. Me and my team have put together a program that'll release a resource every day, from different areas like nutrition, yoga, which is led by a physio, meditation. So that the hypno meditations are really popular and really useful for lots of benefits, as well as like some tips from the latest neuroscience on how to help yourself. The Mental Health Awareness Week is based around loneliness, nationally. And like we've said, what we've talked about of now and the problems that people are seeing and facing, and the hangover from COVID to when, we spoke last year about what might happen, and loneliness being one of the main threads of what practitioners are seeing through their doors.
And in terms of the things like mindfulness and the sort of internal strategies, personal strategies we can apply to find a solution for loneliness, are there any more sort of practical strategies that people who are feeling lonely can undertake?
Yeah, so there's different layers to loneliness. There's, some people have been disconnected to having interactions with people of working from home more and depending on their home life situation. And then there's that loneliness of maybe you are interacting with people and you just don't feel like people know you, that you've got a persona that people might like, but it doesn't feel like you. So there's different layers there. And connection being the solution or the remedy to loneliness. So
it's a common emotional response to different situations, which are a lot more complex than just the standard assumption that someone who is lonely is someone who doesn't have many relationships or doesn't see many people. I think the point you made there about if you're behaving in a way which isn't authentic, I mean, that in itself can make you feel lonely, or you can be lonely in having a particular problem, or you can feel lonely in seeming that everyone else in the world's got a solution to that problem apart from you. So loneliness, as you say, can take a number of different guises.
Yeah. And then, connection, little ways. Again, if you make a small step that's manageable to connect with someone and do it at your pace, you don't have to throw yourself into the deep end. It would just be from that awareness that is a need that we all have, that connection. If we think of, our biology and our nervous system that originates, when we developed as humans, we're wired to be part of a tribe.
Absolutely.
In caveman times, if we were outside of the tribe, then that would be a life or death situation. So we have this natural urge to be as part of a community, and I speak to a lot of people who see, on social media, the idea that everyone has got it all sussed and they're alone with their thoughts and they're away from that. And, and it's not true. And apart, like I said about being authentic and being yourself is the way to connect deeply. And then that connection really supports you in those times.
It does. It's interesting you should mention social media because it's come up such a lot on the podcast when we've been talking about feelings of alienation, restrictions to making progress, such as a lack of mental well-being. And I've started to think more differently about social media in terms of, firstly, I was one of the people who was saying, "Oh, look at all these people. The minute something vaguely nice happens, they're all over Facebook and all over Instagram." But then that's a little unfair on them, is the first point. But the second thing is that, is it an opportunity for someone who's in a bad spot to actually say, because you were talking earlier, Siân, about small gains and about reflection and about doing something nice during the day. And if you capture that moment and you communicate it through the platform of social media, might that be something which is not only not problematic, but could it be part of the solution?
Yeah, and it totally depends on your intention behind it, how you use it. But I think a lot of people who find it hard are comparing their inner struggles to this outside polished, edited version that is being presented by other people. And that just taps into our own insecurities and our comparison. And I think for some people who have this like shiny exterior of this amazing social media feed, if they don't feel like that all the time, then that again can help make them feel lonely and isolated, even though it looks very appealing at the time.
Yeah, and you wonder what the solution is, don't you? Because that makes total sense. But the sort of genie's out the bottle now, isn't it? I mean, I remember, you're younger than me and I'm very much the oldest in the studio, but I can remember a time when you never took a photograph unless you were on your holidays. Or occasionally, my mum and dad would bring the camera when I had like a nativity play at school or something. And it was... and
you were out of shot.
Well, yeah, probably.
Yeah. Closed,
I was the sheep. But seriously, not only was this visual illustration of what your life is like very rare that you took it, well, no one saw it apart from close family and friends, because you got You got the photo album out and you showed people, but only a very small number. Whereas now, the whole globe can see what you're doing, but it's there. And it makes sense to me that it could be the cause and the driver of alienation and demoralization if someone feels that the whole world's having a great time apart from them. But what's the solution now, bearing in mind we're probably not going to persuade Instagram just to wrap up their business and put it into runoff? Where do we go from here?
So, we've been flooded really with lots of options for busyness, haven't we? In, say, like the last 20 years, in half my life that was undocumented as well. And like you said, you'd wait till the next day to speak to someone. You wouldn't know what they'd had for dinner and what they'd done that evening as well. So I suppose the solution is the intention on how we use it. We haven't really caught up with the massive transformation of technology in our lives. The idea that you'd have your phone all the time, you'd use it for everything, would have been crazy, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So management of our behavior with our phone and all of those apps, knowing that it's someone's job to make them addictive, to make them, they've got people who use our psychology to make you use more, whether it's good or bad for us. So it's, again, just understanding that behind the scenes, there's that manipulation in place, and you could go on it and use it and connect to people and enjoy that experience. And if you're not, then you can just rein it in, have a break from it. I regularly try to take breaks from, my phone use, put it in a different, there's lots of really simple ways of having it in a different room, making it a bit more awkward to use. One thing that's been really a real game changer for me is grayscale in your phone. If you've ever done that, it's in one of the settings. You just put it, everything is black and white and grey, and it just is really unappealing to use it. So if you did that, if you found that, maybe late evening is the time when you use your phone the most and you don't want to, or, you'd rather not use that time, putting it on some setting like that just really makes it less appealing.
I've got to do something around this, because I'm not great. I always have my phone in reaching distance. And that includes like taking it to bed with me, and I use it for my alarm.
Yeah.
And again, you think they've been so clever in terms of building these functional tools in, which are so useful. Everything from the light on the phone to the calculator, all these different things, the notes, all these things, it means it's of functional use. Have you seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix?
No, I haven't seen it. I think it sounds terrifying.
Oh, good God. Yeah, I was hiding behind the couch at one stage. I mean, it is... I don't think any of the social media companies set out with like a malevolent intent that they wanted to create platforms which were the cause of any adverse effect upon people's mental well-being. I think they've been commercially driven in terms of their motivations. These are, to some extent, unintended consequences. That's my perhaps slightly optimistic hope. But in terms of where we go from here, as far as I can see, the only solution is around what you've talked about us taking some personal responsibility. Like me, I really should be leaving my phone downstairs. I really should be adopting some of the strategies breaks from social media. It really is the classic scenario that we need to start thinking of it as moderation is okay, but addiction isn't.
Yeah, and we never, I never joined Facebook or Instagram to think that I would check it daily. That, again, would feel absurd when you first started doing it. But it's just reeling back the balance, just getting balance back. If we don't have to be, even think of it as in a heavy way, it's just regaining balance, just getting a an alarm clock, and then just putting your phone on airplane mode. So even when your alarm goes off, I hear it with clients all the time. Their alarm goes off and all they see is all the missed messages and emails straight away. So you're not giving yourself time to even breathe, as you just open your eyes. So if you have it on airplane mode, then those things don't ping through straight away. You
That's
just
a
have
good
your alarm.
suggestion.
Have, a little positive statement or a mantra or something as your alarm. And I've, include lots of tips, in the Spirant group of how to have a better morning routine and how important that is for setting you up for the day. And, just being grateful for that a day ahead. I try to, as I put my feet on the floor, in my head, say to myself, thank you that I'm here in that day. And so my children don't always allow me to feel and express that gratitude straight away because I'm responding to, their needs. But it just gives a different quality to the day ahead.
And that gratitude and that being in the moment and feeling fulfilled is something which really can set you up nicely for the day.
Yeah, that it's not all taken for granted.
No, absolutely. One of the things I just wanted to get your view on was in terms of the messages we send to society, and particularly the way we send the messages we send to our team as employers. I find myself in conflict sometimes on this from a mental well-being perspective, because as you know, in Spirant Group, what we really try and do is create a culture whereby people feel supported and have access to the resources such as yourself and your team, through which they can be helped and they can be supported and that they can be given that partnership in terms of overcoming life's challenges. It seems increasingly that when I open LinkedIn in particular, the message that's coming across is that isn't enough. It's not enough to provide those resources. You have to go above and beyond that into a region where you're actually saying, let's lower our expectation for our team. Let's make sure that their workload is mega manageable. Let's make sure that they don't burn out. Let's make sure that a good work-life balance is eminently achievable through what we expect from them. Now, clearly, there's a lot of merit behind that. And in certain circumstances, that is an absolutely appropriate strategy to adopt. But I look back at myself when I was in my mid-20s, early 30s, probably up until about 10 years ago. And I didn't want to scale back. I didn't want to reduce my workload. My workload at times was unmanageable. And at times I was a bit burnt out. Now, on the one hand, I get that shouldn't be glamorized. But on the other hand, I think, should it be demonized? And I'm not sure it should. Because by pedaling very, very fast and making the absolute best of the skills that you have is one way to achieve fulfillment and contentment and happiness. So just from your perspective, how would you guide employers in terms of, well, first of all, are you with me on the second part? And don't feel compelled to at all. Feel free to disagree with me. I really want you to if you do. But if you do think there's anything there in terms of horses for courses rather than a blanket one-size-fits-all message, what do you think?
Yeah, so I don't think burnout should be glamorized, for sure. And it's all about the culture, isn't it? Of, you can be really motivated, really passionate about your work and have things in place that support you working long hours if that's what you want to do. I think a culture that kind of expects that from everyone, no matter what stage of life they're in, and anything less than that is failure or not welcome, then that's a different matter, isn't it? Because, like you said, we go through different stages where we have like fewer commitments or more energy, or we've got a certain set of goals that we want to achieve. But to have that one size fits all from people who are already, maybe have a lot of challenges at home or other commitments that would clash with what's needed at work, is that one size fit all doesn't work.
It really wouldn't. You're right. Do you think on the other side of the coin, a one size fits all message of you shouldn't push yourself above and beyond the norm because that is detrimental to your health and to your well-being? Are there dangers with that as well?
Well, it totally depends on the person, their personal experiences, and what their tolerance is for stress. People, and that just depends on the person, their own personal tolerance. But for someone to think, well, their tolerance is high and therefore everyone in their team should be high, that's damaging. But also giving people the scope, if they want to go above and beyond and they're very ambitious, that they can meet that need too. So it's just about getting that balance.
And I agree with you. It's about, as if you think of it from a business perspective, it's about having those checks and balances in place and processes which allow you to learn about your team. You really should know, in my opinion, about your team's personal circumstances. You should ask them about those. You should ask them how they are. You should ask how they're feeling about their workload. But I just worry sometimes that because we seem to be, when I say we, I mean sort of society, we seem determined to communicate complex messages simply and at scale. Social media is a great example. That if someone goes onto social media and says basically, which is, I've read in the last week, that employers should be prioritizing keeping workloads at a level that no one will burn out. Burnout's not a great way of describing it, that nobody will have the means to commit at a level above expectation. I don't think that's a helpful message either. I think, as you've said, we really should be catering for, both in businesses and in society, high performers and those who prioritize other areas of their life as their purpose. And I just worry sometimes that if we go into a blanket compassion overload, we almost tell people what self-compassion is, rather than giving them the agency to decide it for themselves. I think we run a risk of developing risk-averse and a next generation who won't fulfill their potential, because that hard work, which has helped many high performers in the past, is being disincentivized.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. I think probably the solution is working smarter, not harder. Getting an email at 11 o'clock at night from someone should ring alarm bells. Like, why, on a regular basis, like why can't they? Why aren't they managing to fit that into normal working hours? Like, what's going on for them? And I know, in your group, there are checks in place for quite a lot of people, and, HR are on it in regard to those alarm bells too. They're aware of that and checking with people. So I think you'd have to have some kind of system or process in there that people can access privately if they're not coping, like you do, where people can directly access coaching. And then, on a more personal level, like from their line manager and some people who know them as individuals, to just see, rather than this blanket, you should work these hours or you shouldn't do this.
It's got to be right, hasn't it? And I think if we can recognize that everybody has different aspirations and also have had different opportunities in the past and will have different tolerance levels as well in terms of what they're prepared to tolerate and what they're able to tolerate. And that they should have the agency to shape their lives in such a way that's consistent with all of that, and that we can support everyone in as best as we possibly can. I think that's the best strategy, rather than just telling people what a good life or a good work-life balance or a good set of values are to actually give people the responsibility that they need if they're going to reach their potential.
Yeah, and I think, maybe some companies have more of a like crash and repair strategy where that's, people burning out is collateral damage, and that's actually less costly to replace people who burn out and have long-term effects for overworking. And then there's other companies who, invest in the people who can see that they've got some things in place to see the warning signs before any of those happen, any of those negative things happen.
Because hard work alone is not the answer, is it? Just pushing yourself to the brink is not a solution in itself. There has to be more behind that. There has to be a plan. There has to be goals which are achievable. Potentially there has to be timescales. There has to be support. And I think if we can recognize that, I think we're in a really good place to learn moving forward, and use the fact that, sort of going back to the start, that we've got the statistics which show that poor mental health is on the increase. So let's use that knowledge, and let's use some of the improved therapeutic strategies that you've talked about, and let's find the solutions for those who need them, and those who don't need them, let's not force them upon them, to have that balance.
Yeah, and it's all about the culture, how people at the top would set that up so that there's language around access and support. But also, just being aware of what helps people to thrive. And there are going to be people who, suffer from mental health issues at all different levels within the business, and how to accommodate them and help them to thrive regardless of their personal challenges is something that a business would benefit from doing.
It will, and I know I've got to let you go soon, but this is the reason we started working with you and your team, Sián, and it's been one of the best investments, one of the best decisions we've ever made, because it's not just that those members of the team who are in a bad place, who are struggling, have access to that resource that will help them. That is crucially important, but it's not the only benefit. It's that the team who don't need that help see it. They see that they're in a business which actually cares about the well-being and the safety and the happiness of those people who invest their own time in coming into work every day. And that's just had nothing but benefits to us. And it's a key part of our values and of our resource moving forward. So I said thank you to you last time you were on the podcast, and you're still here a year later. So I'm hoping it's working for you as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I think, I've got a lot of value of that long-term relationship. I've got to know, the ethos, the culture, the structure and the inner workings, and that's only helped me to like tailor the resources and services. So yeah, that long-term relationship's been mutually beneficial.
Well, anyone who's listening who's thinking of doing what we did in Sparring Group in terms of bringing in this expert resource that staff can access directly without needing to go through a manager, without needing to go through HR, without any requirement to document or update or anything like that, I would wholeheartedly recommend it, because it's one of the smartest investments I think any business will make to back their people and support them, particularly when we've seen today that the support in the public sector, unfortunately, is lacking. I think businesses such as yours, Sián, have got an increasingly important role to play in society and in business.
Yes, thank you.
Not at all. Well, thank you for coming on. Thank you for coming back.
Thanks very much.
We'll have to do this again in another 12 months. And hopefully we're still working together then.
Yes.
Oh, thanks for coming, Siân.
Thank you.
That's all right. Well done.